Good morning. The title of today's service is Familiarity Breeds Compassion, Know Your Neighbor. And I'd like to start out today with a concept that some of you may have heard of, and that's the concept of the other. As social beings, we tend to focus our attention and our energy on those in our inner circle, and it's all too easy to relegate those outside the circle to the vast category of other. Some societies even codify the concept of the other by creating socially acknowledged in-groups and out-groups. For example, in some cultures, the extended family, and that includes your aunts, uncles, cousins, nephews, etc., are the only people that really matter. The group is expected to go to great lengths to look out for them and to take care of all of them. In this type of culture, nepotism is not a dirty word. The flip side, however, is that those who are not in the in-group are relegated to the status of being in the out-group. A quote from the book Intercultural Competence sums it up this way. These societies typically impose a very large psychological distance between those who are members of the group, the in-group, and those who are not members of the group, the out-group. In-group members are required to have unquestioning loyalty, whereas out-group members are considered almost inconsequential. The good news is that in more individualistic cultures like ours, there's a smaller gap between the in-groups and the out-groups. Interestingly, while the out-group members are not as distant, the in-group members are also not as close. How many of us have relatives that we haven't seen or spoken to in months, if not years? But the point I'm getting to here is not that we need to get on the phone when we get home and catch up with Aunt Sally in Wisconsin or Uncle Bert over in Germany. The idea I'm promoting is just opening our hearts and giving our attention to those immediately around us. Also, I'm not saying that we have to care about every person we ever come in contact with. Human beings just aren't equipped to be able to do that, and it would be very stressful to try. But I think we all have people on the edges of our everyday circle that we could reach out to if we chose to be intentional about it. But sometimes we write people off in a knee-jerk reaction before we even get a chance to know them. You know we do it. We put them in a little box in our mind, the irritating one, the fundamentalist, the needy one, or whatever other kind of trait that we don't want to have to deal with. So I'm going to throw out a radical notion here. It's the notion of radical acceptance, undiscriminating love, selfless giving of one's attention, that's easy for me to say, simply because the other person will benefit from it. And you know what I found? True story. For every person that I thought on first impression that I didn't like, but I ended up getting to know them either on purpose or just because it happened, I have received a benefit from that person. Whether it was valuable knowledge that I didn't have before, a fresh new way of looking at things, or even just the realization that first impressions can be deceiving. The turning point for me when I really took a hard look at my own practice of intentional acceptance, or rather the lack of it, unfortunately, was a few years ago. At a large gathering, I encountered an individual who was kind of irritating, and I said to my friend, "Who is that person?" And my friend said, that's how they are. Just don't let it bother you. Just ignore it. Well, I kept it from bothering me by completely avoiding that person. I saw them again here and there, but I never went up and said hello or got to know them. And usually I'm a very outgoing person. I want to know everybody at my church. I want to know everybody at my work. But I thought, well, the easiest thing is just don't talk to this person. They're irritating. Now, I'm really not trying to tug any heartstrings here by saying this. I'm just stating the facts. That about a year later, I learned that this person, the irritating one, had taken their own life. believe me, I'm not naive enough or egotistical enough to think that I could have been the person who made a difference in that person's life. But how alone they must have felt to not see any other way out except for that extreme step. It reminds me of the urban legend story that most of you have probably heard about the young man who befriended a classmate. There was the guy in the class that nobody talked to. They called him names. They said he was geeky. He didn't have any friends. And one day one of his classmates is walking home and he sees the guy up ahead and he's got a stack of books like this and he thinks, what a nerd bringing all those books home to study. And just about that time, the boy drops them. And so the classmate goes up and starts helping him get them together. And just on a whim, he says, hey, you want to come over to my house? And the kid says, really? Sure. So he goes over and they become friends. And they're friends for a couple of years. And then one day, the kid who was lonely before says to his friend, you know, I really wanted to tell you this story. I just felt so alone, and I felt like there wasn't any other way out but to just end my life. And I was coming home from school with all my books because I didn't want my parents to have to go to school and get them. And then when I dropped them and you helped me, you know, man, I really might have done it if you hadn't been there that day. So, you know, a lot of us have heard this story. And the thing about urban legends is that there's a reason they take off like wildfire. It's because people can always identify some kind of universal truth in them. So what's the universal truth in this story? Well, I'm going to introduce another concept here, the concept of marginalization. Webster's dictionary defines marginalization as to relegate to an unimportant or powerless position within a society or group. Many of us tend to marginalize people who don't agree with us. That's where the terms bleeding heart liberal and wingnut came from. Democracy even tends to marginalize people. If we're really committed to practicing intentionality in our relationships with other people, then we should always have consideration for those who don't win the decision, even if they're only 10% of the voters. Because, face it, that's a pretty big only, 1 in every 10 people. But getting back to the personal level, there are ways that we can help ourselves be intentionally accepting of others. All right, I'm going to be honest here. I used to bitch all the time when I encountered negative people in the course of my day. Friends and family who were a little more evolved than I was would say, oh, you know, give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they're just having a bad day. Well, that brings us back to the concept of radical acceptance. Radical acceptance, in part, means using our wonderful brains and imaginations to decide that that person has a reason to be stressed, and we're not going to make it any worse by reacting to them negatively. After all, what is reality but the stories that we tell ourselves? It's true, we all have a dialogue going on in our heads at all times. Two people can experience the exact same situation and interpret it completely differently. So why not just decide that each person is deserving of your consideration, no matter how irritating or bothersome or whatever they might be? And here's something remarkable. I found that if you sincerely ask someone who's acting harried or frustrated or abrupt with you how they're doing, sincerely ask them, they often have a 180-degree attitude change. Just knowing that another person sincerely cares about them just makes their world a better place, even if they're never going to see you again. And I thought it was very interesting that I have a friend who does a kind of counseling called co-counseling, and you don't have to be a counselor to do it. You just have to read the book and learn about it and go to sessions. And some of you may have heard of it. It's just two people listening to each other. It can be for 5 minutes each or a half an hour each once you get used to doing it. And my friend said that she's noticed something very interesting. She's been doing this co-counseling for a long time. And in it, you open yourself up to the other person. You think of that person in your mind. And you want what's best for them. And you listen to what they have to say. And you look at them in the best light possible. And you don't have to worry about how you're going to respond or what you're going to say next, because you're not going to say anything. They're just talking. My friend said that after doing this for quite some time, she actually noticed that in a line at a store or in a group of people, complete strangers would just start talking to her about personal things. They'd confide in her. And she said, she can't pinpoint what it is, but she's changed. Something about her has changed because of this practice of intentional listening, and people can just sense it. I just thought that was remarkable. So what I'm going to do for our final song is ask everyone to stand, but we're going to listen in a moment, but we're going to listen to the music. We're not going to sing along. Instead, if you would please look around the sanctuary and identify somebody that you don't know, or if you're one of those people who knows everybody, then somebody that you just haven't talked to in a long time. And while the music is playing, just go over and share with them. Ask them how they've been doing. Introduce yourself if you don't know them. And let's just get to know each other until the song ends.